Hello, everyone, and welcome to lecture day number 2. This is actually module number 3 and the third official lecture of the course. Hopefully you're engaging with this on May 21st, and you have quiz number 3 due tonight at 11:59 p.m. Before you do anything today, though, I would first like you to open up the story, short poem by Helen E. Buckley, who was an educator, and read over that. So go ahead and pause the lecture recording and you can read over that. Okay, so Helen E. Buckley was an educator and a writer, and she wrote this poem to show about how sometimes the education system can teach the creativity out of us. Um, know, what if you want to design a study of your own, but there's really only a certain way you can do it? You end up with a red flower with a green stem. So when you design your projects, you're going to have two competing goals, that of creativity and that of the boundaries that we set by epistemology. Epistemology refers to a field's theory of knowledge. And it especially refers to the methods, validity, and scope. Or in other words, how do we come to know the things that we know in our field? Social psychology has a particular way of doing things, which is very different from other fields, and that can quell creativity. Another thing that we've talked about that can put a stop to your creativity is uh, time. We just don't have a lot of it. So in today's lecture, what we're going to talk about is something called the counterfactual framework and how we use it to test causation. We're going to talk about some types of experimental manipulation, some things to consider when constructing experiments, and the type of experimental designs that exist. So first things first, we're going to get into this counterfactual framework. And in our world, we are setting out to make causal claims. We want to know uh, not just how A and B change together. We want to know if A causes B to change. So here you can see we've got different flavors of ice cream and the number of scoops people asked for. 13 scoops of chocolate. That's like when my wife isn't home and I'm hanging out watching sports on the TV by myself. 13 scoops of ice cream. We can see there on the scale. But most of the time we're aiming to figure out how A and B change together. And causation specifically tells us, did A make B happen? So one example of this might be uh, the effects of alcohol on your well-being. Uh, I've read about it on the internet that drinking too much alcohol can cause a headache. And I don't know if anybody has any personal experience with that. Um, but if you do, or if, rather, if you don't, you can read about it on the internet like I did. Uh, the first criteria for making a causal claim is the causal variable has to precede the effect variable. It has to come before it in your experimental design. Okay? But be aware that some relationships are bidirectional. Maybe drinking alcohol can cause a headache, but maybe having a headache might lead you to drink more alcohol. So the best way to set this up is to experimentally manipulate the independent variable prior to measuring the dependent variable. So maybe I assign you to a condition where you drink alcohol versus a condition where you drink water, and then the next day I measure your headache. Another criterion for causality is that the two variables have to be related. So let's say that we're looking at a perspective taking manipulation where we teach people how to get in the shoes of somebody else, metaphorically, of course. And if that's related to doing something nice for them, kindness. But a lot of times we find in the literature, this is in my field, that these two variables aren't related. And it's usually because a suppressor variable is there. Um, Now, if these two variables weren't related, we would have to stop and go, okay, well, we can't make causation. This is like in statistics, if your p-value is greater than 0.05, uh-oh, these two variables are not related to each other. But just be aware that there might be suppressor variables out there. One suppressor variable is that taking other people's perspective seems to cause empathy, and it actually wipes out the relationship. But here, there's actually a causal chain where empathy makes people act kinder toward others. And it does so because people were asked to take the perspective of that person. Okay, so just be aware. The two variables have to be related, though. And three, the correlation can't be spurious. It can't be by chance. There's a whole lot of spurious correlations out there in the world. Um, Give me just a second and I will pull them up. Some of these are um, a little uncomfortable to look at, but this is from my generation. Popularity of the I'm on a boat meme and the number of executive administrative assistants in Alabama. Okay, wow. Those are related at the P less than 0.01 level, and the correlation is 0.989. Wow. And distance between Saturn and the sun and the consumer satisfaction with HP. Fantastic. But yeah, in your free time, I know you have a lot of it. You can go check out that website, spurious correlation. So it can't just be by chance. All right, here we go. So this idea comes from the counterfactual framework, um, which tells us that we can never truly say that A causes B, although we do sometimes say that. The logic instead is not that A causes B. The way that we set up our experiments is that B would not have occurred if it were not for A. B would not have occurred. B that we measure after we manipulate A would not have occurred if not for A. So in other words, kindness would not have occurred if we didn't ask people to take the perspective of others. Ethical behavior would not have occurred if we didn't put the people in the upper class condition. We can't use counterfactuals in non-experimental research. They are inconceivable. And you can't say that somebody's gender caused them to have more driving errors. And the reason why is that you did not experimentally manipulate their gender. It was something that uh, they have chosen. So yes, we can't go in that direction. Only for experimental variables can you use this experimentally manipulated variables. Can you use this counterfactual framework? Okay, some other insights that come from this. So this is a little tricky to think about. The observed outcome in the non-treated condition is only a proxy for the counterfactual outcome in the treated condition. We treat the control condition as what would have happened to the exact same participants who got treated had they instead received the non-treatment. What? Go ahead and read through that a couple more times. It's what would have happened to the same participants in the treated condition had they received the non-treatment. Counterfactual framework. This is why we have to have a control group in experiments. If you don't have a control group, it is not a true experiment, and you can't make causal inferences. Can't make causal inferences. So shifting gears here, we're going to talk a little bit about experimental manipulations in social psychology and how we can improve the design of our research. So remember, experimentation is a method in which one or more of the independent variables are systematically changed. The researcher chooses the groupings to which people belong. So here we've got an example of people being asked for money out on the street, and they are changing the prompt that these people are receiving. So maybe they're given a reason, hey, I forgot my wallet at home, or they're given no reason at all. Hey, could you spare $1? So the key here, which differentiates this from correlational and quasi-experimental designs, is that the researcher chooses the groups that the participants are in. We use random assignment here, in which participants end up with an equal chance of being assigned to an experimental group. So in other words, it's kind of like a coin flip. When you are put into a study, you have an equal chance of being in the control or the experimental condition. So this makes it so that people are equal on all variables out there in the world, all extraneous variables. And the control group represents what the population would do. Why can we say that? Well, we've controlled for all extraneous variables through random assignment. Or in other words, things like gender, psychological variables like intelligence or empathy that you experience in everyday life, your openness to experience. They are, in theory, all equal when you use random assignment. Now, that doesn't always work. Take my dissertation, for example. I tried to put people into a mindfulness meditation condition or a sham mindfulness meditation condition. And I ended up with some differences in psychological traits across those groups. Uh-oh, not good. Another thing to think about is realism in experiments when you're designing research. Now, this doesn't necessarily help us to make causal inferences. It's really more involved in external validity, where we can start to map on our results from a study into how people might behave in the real world. The first type of realism is called mundane realism. And this represents the degree to which experimental procedures map onto something that could occur in the real world. This is something that participants might actually encounter in their day-to-day life. So like my dissertation study in which I told participants, hey, we're running late for the study. I'm going to ask you to sit down in this chair here in a waiting room, and I'm going to go set up the experiment in the lab. And then those folks went on in there and or I would go into the lab, and then a person on crutches would come out, and we would measure whether or not the participant got up out of their seat to offer the person on crutches that seat. So here, this is something that could happen in everyday life. We encounter waiting rooms all the time, and it's likely that you might have run into a situation in which you've had the opportunity to offer your seat to someone who needed it more than you. So that's mundane realism. Experimental realism, or what we refer to as psychological realism, represents the degree to which the experiment feels real or impactful to participants. So you can see on the screen here, there's people throwing a ball back and forth. And that thing that I don't even know what that is, it looks like a hand down at the bottom corner. That's you. And you notice that you're not getting the ball. Now, this is not really something that happens in everyday life where you're logging into a computer game and then you're excluded by other people. But it still hurts. Check out this series of photos of a man playing this cyberball game. Sorry for the obscene gesture there, but this was his reaction to the game. He's having fun. Looks like he's getting the ball, and then he's excluded for a while, and then he points his middle finger at the screen. Poor guy. So even though this is not something that we would encounter in our everyday life, it is really impactful. It's got high experimental realism. Okay, so let's talk about manipulating variables. Wow, that's orange. If you're a Tennessee Volunteer fan, you're welcome. That looks like volunteer orange. Okay. Um, so experimental manipulations. We're going to talk about different types of manipulations that we use in social psychology. One includes environmental manipulations. This is where the experimenter changes the environment in a systematic way to understand how it shapes behavior. So let's say that we have a problem. There's a lot of people jaywalking across this street. They're supposed to walk across the crosswalk, but they're crossing further up. And cars are not looking for these folks when they do that. Okay, we want to try to put a stop to this. Maybe I could manipulate the environment. Um, some things like posting a sign that says there's a fine for jaywalking, right? We want to protect people. One of the best ways to do this, though, are planting bushes, especially like prickly bushes along the row here, so that people can't cross at those locations. They're kind of forced to cross over the crosswalk. You could build a little wall across the median where they're not supposed to walk. Uh, Thinking back to when I was at Beach Week again, this is the second Beach Week story to come up. I remember we were all going out to a fun club to go dancing, and our friend Max was crossing the road jaywalking, and it had just rained that day. And where we were at, the medians had these really like deep places that collected a lot of water. And Max thought that he was going to jump over it, but it was like 20 feet wide. And I'll never forget as he was, in the air, uh, how funny it was when his body completely disappeared into the water. And then he had to go out dancing like that. Fun time. So environmental manipulations. Another type that we refer to are called stimulus manipulations. This is where the experimenter changes features of the stimulus materials so that it can understand how we shape judgment. So who are you more likely to hire? Gregory Williams or Gregory Smith or Jamal Smith? Emily Williams or Lakeisha Williams? Okay. Researchers did a study like this in 2004 when they submitted resumes with either white sounding names like Emily or Gregory or black sounding names. On the top of the resume, the resumes were virtually identical. Okay. And they found that those who had white sounding names were twice as likely to receive callbacks. So these were actually sent out to real job openings in Chicago and Boston. and the differences were quite striking. Okay, so another type of manipulation refers to social manipulations. This is where the experimenter changes features of the social situation. I'm going to give myself just a second here to get this pulled up. I apologize. Um, so the example that I'm about to show you, you've probably seen before. Okay. So this is the classic smoke-filled room study. It's got no audio associated with it, but you can see that this person here is alone, and she notices, uh-oh, there's smoke coming into the room, and goes to check out the situation. Yep, that's smoke. That shouldn't be happening, and I'm gonna get my stuff and head out of here. Now the social situation has been changed. There's Confederates around, and it's the same context though. Smoke's still coming in the room, and it's starting to fill up the room. Now, these other people are actually involved with the study, and they are trained to not react at all. So notice what she's doing. She's looking around to see, does anybody else notice this? Humans are really social creatures, and we often look to others to help us define the social situation. She's aware that this is weird. She's aware that she's probably being studied. Um, and let's just fast forward to the end here. It's 20 minutes, and she still has not gotten up out of the room. Okay, so as you can see, social manipulations can be quite powerful. Okay. Another type of manipulation refers to instructional manipulations. These effects are not very replicable, though. The example that I'm showing you is how instructions were changed on a math test. Um, there is a concept in social psychology called stereotype threat, in which people who know stereotypes that are held about their social groups tend to confirm them when they feel like that stereotype is being threatened or activated. Um, and here, the experimenter tells people that either they're taking a math aptitude test, and notice here that men and women are not different. Um, but when they were told that the same test, the exact same test, was to measure gender differences, there was a difference in performance. Um, so what changed there was the instruction. All right. One other example that I have is of priming. These are really hard to pull off. This is where the experimenter attempts to activate a mental state or concept in your mind. It's primed or made salient, and it helps you to helps us to understand how this concept activation affects participants' thoughts and feelings and behaviors, the ABCs of social psychology. So in this study, they experimentally manipulated people through priming by having them fill out an anagram task. And on this anagram task, some people received words about politeness, some people received control words, and then some people received words about rudeness. Um, at the end of the session, participants were instructed to walk down the hall and hand their anagram task paper to the experimenter. But the experimenter was trained to be in the middle of having an unimportant conversation with another experimenter, and they were trained to ignore the real participant when they walked up. So they were allowed to stand there for 10 minutes, and the question was whether or not the participant interrupted the person's conversation. Those who were primed with polite words interrupted way less in this 10-minute period than those in the control or rude prime condition. Pretty interesting stuff. Again, these are hard to replicate. There's been a lot of ways to, well, there's really only been two ways to experimentally manipulate social class in the lab. I've seen a study in which they give an unequal distribution of monopoly money. Um, and we talked about manipulation in class on Monday, the 19th, uh, concerning getting people to think about their relative low or high social class rank. Okay, switching gears one final time. I want to talk about the types of experimental designs that you might encounter. This is the gold standard in psychology and in science, is the pretest post-test control group design. When we do randomized control trials, this is what we're doing. If you can think back to the early times in COVID where we were doing science on the vaccines, these are the types of designs that were being done. So here a pretest measurement of the dependent variable is given. Then participants are randomly assigned into an experimental group or a control group, and then the dependent variable is measured again. Okay, so this is our gold standard, and it can rule out differences at post-test that didn't start before the treatment began. Right, so sometimes we can have random assignment that doesn't actually work. If we measure people prior to random assignment, we can rule out that any differences we see at post-test didn't actually occur based on the pretest. One design that we use more in social psychology is the post-test only design. It's the same as the randomized control trial, except that there's no pretest. Participants are just randomly assigned into one group or another, and they are given a post-test assessment of the dependent variable. So why this is really helpful in social psychology is that we use a lot of deception in our work. And if we put people into the same situation twice, they can kind of figure out what's going on with the study. Think about the ostracism example that I had from before. We don't want them to see that manipulation twice. Because the first time it's probably really going to affect them, but the second time it's going to be like, okay, this is kind of weird. Factorial designs are used quite frequently in in social psychology and other research. This is where you have two or more independent variables, and you can randomly assign people to combinations of the groups. This is good for helping researchers to see what the boundaries of a treatment effect are. Does it occur for everybody? Does it occur for some people? Does the strength of the relationship change depending on the context that we're testing it in? And then the last design that I'll talk about today is our repeated measures design. This is where everybody receives all the groups that are involved in a study. And we do something where there's still a random assignment, which seems kind of counterintuitive. And this random assignment is called Counterbalancing, so everybody receives all the groups, but depending on your random assignment, you receive some groups first and then the other half receive the other group first. This helps to rule out order effects. All right. So you're probably going to be able to implement some of these types of designs in your research easier than others. Most likely, it's going to be the post-test only design in the field study you're conducting. Make sure you all finish quiz number 3 tonight, May 21st by 11:59 p.m. Remember, those are extra credit. They can only help you. They can't hurt you.